Hey everyone, I'm Allison Morris. You're watching NBC News Now. Here's what's happening.
I think, frankly, the composition of the Select Committee is shaping up very well. I think both Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger are serious about getting to the truth of January 6th.
Kinzinger and Cheney are in, but will any other Republicans join them on the January 6th Select Committee before the House investigation kicks off tomorrow? And from get out the vote to get out the vaccine, we'll take you inside the latest effort to get the Latino community vaccinated one door at a time. We start today on Capitol Hill. NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Leanne Caldwell has the latest for us on the January 6th committee. So, Leanne, Chairman Benny Thompson, Congresswoman Liz Cheney will give the opening statements tomorrow. Things are finally kicking off. So what are you watching for?
That's right, Allison. The fact that Representative Cheney is giving one of two opening statements shows that Democrats are putting a lot of elevation in the role of Representative Cheney. They've been extremely pleased with her performance so far in these meetings that they've had. They said she's such a hard worker. She's come with a commitment and a dedication to finding what they say is the truth. But in addition to the role of Representative Cheney and the other lone Republican, Representative Adam Kinzinger, both appointed by Speaker Pelosi, I'm also going to be watching for the testimony, and that's from 4 police officers, rank and file, who were on the front lines on January 6th. And this will be the first time that Congress will publicly and officially hear their testimony. So it could be very raw, emotional testimony from these witnesses, Allison.
Leanne, it's incredible to hear you say how pleased the committee is with her own performance. Meanwhile, she's struggling so much within her own party. It's unbelievable. As we've said, Speaker Pelosi also appointed Congressman Adam Kinzinger to the committee. He's the only other Republican besides Cheney. What are you hearing on the Hill about that and about whether any other Republicans might make the cut here?
Yeah, well, it's caused quite a rift among the Republican Party, especially since GOP leader Kevin McCarthy, he said today, he called them Pelosi Republicans. Now, let's be clear. Leader Pelosi and Democrats and Representative Adams, Kinzinger and Cheney, they don't have anything in common on policy, really, national security, except for this issue of January 6th. Now, Adam Kinzinger, let's listen to how he responded to Leader McCarthy's remarks.
For too long, we've been pretending like January 6th didn't happen. President Trump himself said this is a day that we will remember. Remember this forever. And yet it feels like we're trying to forget. So I never expected to be in this position. But because of duty calling to do this and to get to the bottom, I'm committed to doing it.
Now, there are 4 open seats on this committee. Will other Republicans be appointed by Speaker Pelosi? Well, they did not close the door to that, but some Republicans are going to have to step up and indicate that they are willing to serve on this committee. And so far, my sources are telling me that hasn't happened yet. Allison.
Leanne, we know the House leaves for August recess on Friday. What is this committee hoping to get done before then? And then let's talk about the longer view here.
Yeah, so this is the first hearing that the committee is holding, and then they, like you said, they leave for 7 weeks. And so this is just the very beginning of what's expected to be a very long process. I'm told that the months of August and September are going to be a lot of research, a lot of investigation, a lot of staffing up, but this could take a lot of time. Representative Adam Schiff, one of the Democrats on this committee, he talked about this on MSNBC earlier today, and let's listen.
I think it would be very difficult to get all the work done that we need to by the end of the year. That would be just a matter of months. So I don't think that's very practical, but we do have a sense of urgency. We want to get this done as quickly as we can. Okay. Part of it will depend on how much obstruction that we run into, because that has been a big part of the problem and the issue with delay in the past.
So he's talking about obstruction. They say that they would like some Trump White House aides to come testify, but we know that throughout previous investigations into the Trump White House, there has been a lot of stalemate on that front, and Republicans did not agree in part to a commission, an independent commission, because they didn't want it to bleed into an election year. Well, you could be assured, Allison, that it is already September. Next year is a midterm election year. It will be sure that this select committee drags deep into that midterm election year. Allison.
Oh, yeah, no doubt there. Leanne Caldwell with the latest from Capitol Hill ahead of a 7-week recess. I'm sorry, I just can't wrap my brain around that, Leanne. That sounds pretty darn good.
Yeah, it's actually very rare, but yes, it is supposedly happening.
All right, Leanne, thanks so much. We'll catch up with you later.
Yeah.
Well, the Senate still hasn't finalized its bipartisan spending bill, but they're hopeful. So what's the holdup? NBC News national political reporter Sahil Kapoor joining me now. Sahil, Senator Mark Warner said yesterday he thought there would be a bill in place today. What are they stuck on tonight?
Yeah, Allison, there's been a lot of optimism in public that has not really been backed up by the details of what they're actually doing in private. The negotiators are almost certain not to be finished by today. They're still resolving some serious disputes, most notably the issue of distribution of funding in this infrastructure deal between highways and public transit. Democrats want what they call the 80-20 ratio, 80% highways, 20% transit, that goes back to all the way in the Reagan era. Republicans say that number is not fixed, hasn't always been used, and they want to drop that transit funding to under 20%. That is the single biggest issue, but there are others as well, like what to do with unspent COVID relief funding and broadband policy. Democrats are getting increasingly antsy here, and they want to get to a result. Senator Chuck Schumer, the Democratic leader, threatened to have the Senate continue working during the weekend. It's something that senators don't usually like doing. Let's play some of what he had to say just this afternoon.
Since senators are still finalizing the text of the agreement, senators should be on notice that the Senate may stay in session through the weekend in order to finish the bill. We have reached a critical moment. The bipartisan group of senators has had nearly 5 weeks of negotiations since they first announced an agreement with President Biden. It's time for everyone to get to yes and produce an outcome for the American people.
Now, Schumer's last attempt to impose a deadline last Wednesday with a procedural vote did not work out very well. 0 Republicans voted for it, and that procedural motion was stranded. But the prospect of senators actually working through a weekend, potentially losing some of their August recess, which they really value, maybe they could have a different outcome.
Yeah, put a little pressure. Tell them they got to work the weekends and they might miss some of their vacation or recess. I'm sorry. I know that's the official term. So, Sahil, you said it, right? The House leaves for its August recess Friday. The Senate's supposed to be heading out of town next week. I mean, realistically, are we looking at a September timeline now? Is it just unreasonable to think that they are going to lock this up before then? What else are you hearing on the Hill?
For final passage, Allison, it's almost certain to be September or possibly later because the House still has to vote. People are talking a lot about the Senate, but remember, there's this whole other chamber that has to sign off on this deal, and they haven't done it yet. The hope is that the Senate finishes voting before the August recess and begins the process of that $3.5 trillion budget reconciliation bill. Now, Speaker Pelosi has made very clear over and over again for more than a month now that the House is not going to vote on either bill until the Senate is done with both. So to your point, yes, it's going to be at least September before this gets finally passed and sent to President Biden's desk, if it does, because she wants both those bills together.
At least September. All right. Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Inflation doesn't matter. Democrats in the White House and Congress are betting that the long-term benefits of their agenda will outweigh a temporary rise in prices. That's the analysis from NBC News senior national politics reporter Jonathan Allen. John is here with me now. John, NBC News got its hands on a private White House presentation encouraging Democratic lawmakers to focus on how Biden's $4 trillion in spending will lower costs for American families. You write here, the suggestion is that more federal spending will more than counteract inflation. So take us into that line of thinking and the polling they're using to back this one up.
Sure. I mean, there's an economic argument between economists or among economists as to what $4 trillion of government spending will do. And some of them say that will tend to increase inflation, that if people have more money in their pockets, they're going to have more demand. And as a result of that, with limited supply, prices will go up. There are others who say that there's been no real proven connection between those two things. And now what you've got essentially is the Biden White House arguing the opposite, that ultimately that the economic benefits of this are going to reduce prices for consumers. And beyond that, some of the ways in which they are targeting money to lower and middle income folks will in fact make things easier for them to buy, even if the prices go up.
So, John, all right, basically the bet here is that Americans will like these longer term benefits of the spending plans, and they'll forget about the high prices we're paying right now at the grocery store or the gas station right now. I mean, let's be honest, right? I feel like we're always complaining about gas prices, whatever they are. But not every Democrat in Congress can afford to wait for those long-term benefits, right? You're writing for the most vulnerable Democrats, from Senator Joe Manchin to a set of House moderates who narrowly won re-election last year, an acceleration in inflation that is short-term could end their careers before the long-term benefits are felt. So I got two questions for you here. First, how do you pass all this spending when you need Democrats like Joe Manchin on board? And two, how could this shape the 2022 midterms?
Well, Sahil Kapoor just told you that they're thinking about September before you even look at this this infrastructure package, and that Nancy Pelosi has said that neither of those bills is going to go, either the infrastructure or the reconciliation bill that's about $3.5 trillion is going to go until both of them can go. The over-under on Capitol Hill right now is somewhere between Thanksgiving and Christmas. As far as those members go, I mean, look, I think it's impossible to predict levels of inflation, but they are hearing from constituents who are upset. I was in Michigan earlier this summer, and there were folks there saying that, they'd go to the grocery store, and one woman told me that it's usually about $98. Her weekly groceries were $120 or $130. Definitely consumers are feeling some of this pinch. They go and talk to their members of Congress, or they simply watch what's going on. And there's a lot of nervousness among those members who are in vulnerable seats that the prices will be up, and that their constituents will be feeling that come next November, and they want to be very careful about what it is they vote for.
Yeah. So, John, it seems like this leaves them in quite a pickle, right? It doesn't look like this is going to get passed soon enough. It doesn't look like we're going to, even if they do get passed by the start of the year, see the long-term effects before potentially the midterms. So I'm not asking you to bet exactly, but are the Democrats making a bad bet here? Are they taking on a little bit too much risk, as an economist might ask?
It depends on which Democrat you're talking about, right? Because the incentive for President Biden, who is there temporarily, whether it's 4 years or 8 years, and the incentive for the Democratic leadership in Congress, which is not in danger of losing its seats, is to get the policies that they want done. And what you hear from progressive Democrats in particular is they're not worried about the inflation numbers. They're not sure that what they do is going to be related to driving inflation higher. Absent that, or even with it, the goals that they have in terms of expanding Medicare, in terms of fighting climate change, in terms of infrastructure spending, are more important to them than the potential short-term increase in inflation. And so, they have that interest versus the interests of those members of Congress who have to face voters with their careers on the line come next November. And we'll see the margin. The problem for President Biden and for the Democrats in Congress who want to get these things done is that their margins are so small they can't afford to lose one Democrat in the Senate, and they can't afford to lose more than 4 Democrats in the House. That number will lower to 3, I believe, with a special election coming up in Texas. So you're talking about just a few members peeling off could really tank the whole thing.
Yeah, those are some pretty slim margins there, for sure. John Allen, great analysis today. But I say that every time. We always love having you on. Thank you.
And Allison, I want to congratulate you on making it through the weekend despite the Yankees dropping 3 of 4.
I don't know what you're talking about, John. I didn't watch any baseball this weekend. I have no idea what you're talking about. If I didn't see it, it didn't happen.
Fair enough.
Thanks, friend.
Take care.
Another major military milestone, an end to the U.S. combat mission in Iraq. President Biden making that announcement after meeting with Iraq's prime minister at the White House today. NBCNews.com senior White House reporter Shannon Pettypiece is here with me now. Shannon, both leaders making it clear that the U.S. mission in Iraq is evolving. So what do we know about the U.S. role there going forward?
Well, the White House is trying to emphasize that this is going to be a change in mission, a shift from a combat mission to more of a support mission where they're training and supporting and advising members of the Iraqi military and fighting ISIS where needed, but that is not going to be the primary focus. Of course, this fits with a bigger theme we have heard from this administration. It was only a few weeks ago when they were talking about ending the operations in Afghanistan, with the president there saying there is not a military solution necessarily to the problems in Afghanistan. And while the U.S. will continue to provide support, it is not going to be military support. And of course, almost all troops are out of Afghanistan now. It's a little unclear what the numbers are going to look like as far as troops in Iraq, but certainly an indication that this president plans to stay the course he is on and try and end these wars as much as he can in the Middle East.
Is there a timetable for potential redeployment here? I mean, what else do we know?
So the administration said they've gone from about 9,000 military personnel in Iraq to about 2,500 now. When we pressed Press Secretary Jen Psaki on this a little while ago, she wouldn't commit to any sort of number. She said the mission will dictate the number. Obviously, internally, there is probably a sense of how many people we are going to need militarily in the country going forward, but they're not committing to any sort of number, certainly not the way we've seen in Afghanistan, where they've talked about having 90% of the troops out of the country at this point.
Shannon, today the president celebrated the 31st anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act with a new effort to help people who are dealing with the long-term effects of COVID-19. Could you tell us about that new push?
Yeah, so, I mean, the administration made an announcement today saying that they are going to add long COVID as one of the illnesses that qualifies for protection under federal civil rights laws for people with disabilities. So that could give protection to people who are experiencing these prolonged symptoms from COVID-19, protection from being discriminated against for housing or for employment, for example. Here's a little bit more what the president had to say on that.
Many Americans who seemingly recover from the virus still face lingering challenges like breathing problems, brain fog, chronic pain, and fatigue. These conditions can sometimes rise to the level of a disability. So we're bringing agencies together to make sure Americans with long COVID who have a disability have access to the rights and resources that are due under the disability law.
And there are some studies that show that 1 in 10 people infected with COVID-19 have some of these long COVID symptoms. So it's certainly not a small group we're talking about. The president said he's going to bring the agencies together in his government to figure out how to make sure that any sort of prolonged disabilities people might experience don't end up hurting them in the long term.
Shannon, the president also took a question at that event today about whether employers should mandate COVID vaccines. What did he say to that?
The president and the White House have been hesitant a bit to call for any widespread vaccine mandates, although today a bit of a big announcement coming out of the administration saying that the Veterans Affairs Administration, which of course is a federal agency, will require all healthcare workers to be vaccinated. So those federal healthcare workers who are going to be treating patients at the VA will soon have to be required to be vaccinated. So a sense that the administration is supportive of requirements in certain instances, although they do continue to stop short of calling for any sort of federal mandate or any sort of employer-wide mandate and leaving that up to the private sector and to state and local governments for now.
All right, Shannon Pettypiece on the White House lawn. Thank you. Former President Trump's inaugural chair, Tom Barrack, pleading not guilty today to charges that he acted as a foreign agent to the United Arab Emirates and lied to the FBI when questioned about it nearly 2 years ago. Barrack, a decades-long friend of Donald Trump, now out of prison on a $250 million bond, one of the largest criminal bails in history. NBC News investigative correspondent Tom Winter joins me now with all the juicy details. So, Tom, what happened in court today?
Well, not as many details as we normally get, unfortunately, Allison.
Yeah.
It is a federal arraignment, and it is a little bit cut and dry, and a good portion of it, about 50 minutes of it, 50 minutes of it, were spent on the intricate details of this massive $250 million bond that Tom Barrack has been able to get in order to get himself out on bail, awaiting trial here. Barrack, as you said, pleaded not guilty to the charges today. That was what was expected. He issued a statement afterwards, a paper statement stating that in noting the proximity to the Statue of Liberty from the courthouse in Brooklyn, in saying that the best moments are the ones forged in fire. So he appears that he is willing to fight these charges, to say the least.
Yeah,
but a lot of this hearing, like I said, was focused on the on the bill in the package in particular. Federal judges have to query people that sign up and provide the surety. So in other words, Allison, if you were looking for a bail package and I said that I was going to put up my own assets to make sure that you could get out of jail, I would then have to be called before the judge, and he would make sure that I was doing this on my own will and so on and so forth. So that's what we heard from the judge today, and that was a big focus of this.
Well, Tom, if I needed a $250 million bond as part of my bail package, you are certainly the first person I would call. So give us a little more background on Barrack. He's not one of the faces in the Trump orbit that maybe our average viewer would know that much about. He wasn't someone we heard about all the time until recently. So what should our viewers know about him and what's next for him?
Right. So, I mean, I think over the past couple of years, for a lot of reasons, we've gotten to be familiar with the Michael Flynn's of the world, with the Paul Manafort's of the world, the George Papadopoulos. Barrack, who's the person who's now coming into view as center screen with the kind of gray, whitish mustache and goatee there. He's somebody who, in the Trump orbit, is probably actually the one who is closest to the president, a friend of his for over 30 plus years. According to Forbes in 2013, they estimated his net worth at about $1 billion. Very heavily invested in the real estate business, owned a company, or I should say ran a company called Colonnade Capital, publicly traded. He's no longer running that company. Huge Middle Eastern ties. I mean, this is somebody who's done an enormous amount of business in the Middle East, and obviously makes sense why he would know the Emiratis. I don't think that's in question at all. I don't think he would dispute that at all, even though he dismisses the charges. So this is somebody who's close to the president, advised him during the campaign, and then was his Trump inaugural chairman during the inaugural fundraising, which pulled in just a tremendous amount of money for a committee like that. So Barrack is definitely somebody close to the president, close to his family, somebody who knows him well, a bit of a different character from some of the folks we've seen in the past.
So given how close he is to the Trump family and how well he knows the president, any response from former President Trump? Do we have any sense of what their relationship is like right now?
So that's what's really interesting. We haven't heard from the president. And if I was the president's attorney, that's exactly what I would be doing. I wouldn't be issuing a statement. I mean, in some respects here, Allison, the president, the former president, Donald Trump, is the victim here, and his administration is the victim here. So if they had no idea that Tom Barrack was this involved, allegedly, with the Emiratis and was piping back to them sensitive, non-public information about the Trump administration and their thoughts on Middle Eastern policy, if they were completely unaware of that, they're the victim here in many respects, and the rest of us are as well, the American people, because our foreign policy may have been shaped by somebody who was working on the inside with the Emiratis. At least those are the charges. So the president here not issuing a statement. There have been some reports that the relationship kind of waned over the final couple of years of the Trump presidency, but it's not entirely clear to me where things would have stood today if Barrack wasn't charged and you were to call up Donald Trump and say, tell us about Thomas Barrack, or call Thomas Barrack and ask him what he thinks about Donald Trump. I don't know how much daylight and space there is between them now. And so it'll be interesting to see if we do hear from the president going forward, particularly as, you know, inevitably we'll get more information about the conduct that's alleged here in this case, Allison.
All right, Tom, you always have all the scoop. Even if the details of the court hearing are mostly focused on bail package, you always know what's going on. Thank you so much.
You got it. Sure.
All right, let's go to NBC News Now correspondent Simone Boyce. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Hi, Simone.
Hey, Allison. All right, today we start with some very heartbreaking news out of Utah, where at least 8 people are dead after a sandstorm caused a 22-car pileup on a highway. Officials say multiple children are among the dead, at least 10 other people taken to nearby hospitals as well. And a counterterrorism organization formed by some of America's biggest tech companies is expanding to crack down on white supremacists and far-right militias. So the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism generally focuses on content from Islamist extremist organizations, but will begin adding details about domestic extremist groups to its database. This will allow sites like Twitter and Google to identify their content and then remove it. Well, New York City and the state of California will require their public workers to get vaccinated against COVID or get tested for the virus regularly. In New York City, the move is expected to impact about 340,000 people, including all public school teachers and police officers. Officials say no one will be forced to get vaccinated, but they hope the inconvenience of those weekly tests will encourage more people to do so. And Philip Morris International, the company behind Marlboro, reportedly saying it plans to stop selling cigarettes in the UK within the next 10 years. The report coming 2 years after British officials said they want to end smoking in England by the year 2030. But critics say the tobacco giant has issued similar statements in the past, but they haven't seen much change. All right, and 13-year-old Momiji Nishia taking home the gold in women's skateboarding for Japan. Now, just to get an idea of how young this superstar is, American skateboarding legend Tony Hawk had retired by the time she was born. Now, she wasn't the only teen on the podium, though. The silver medal went to another 13-year-old from Brazil, and bronze went to a 16-year-old also representing Japan. Allison, it blows my mind just how young some of these competitors are. I think I was watching Mary-Kate and Ashley movies when I was 13 years old.
I'm watching the Olympics and thinking I could be everybody's mother. It's unbelievable. They're just so young and talented. I am blown away. Very cool stuff. It's time for the bottom line, our daily look at what's going on in the business world and beyond. The markets hanging out in record territory to start off the week. The Dow closing up just about 83 points, finishing above that 35,000 mark once again. We love to see that. Investors gearing up for the busiest week of earnings season. And you know what that means. CNBC correspondent Rahel Solomon is here with a look at the busy week ahead. So, Rahel, we're talking about what? About 165 S&P 500 companies reporting this week. We got the tech giants on deck. Art Hogan over at National Securities calling this, and I love this, the World Series of earnings smack in the middle of summer. So who are we hearing from, and what's the outlook? Are people going to want to check their portfolios and their retirement accounts this week?
Well, we might see some volatility this week in the markets, although I don't know. I think that could be due to the big Fed meeting later this week. More on that a little later. But in terms of earnings, yes, this week is sort of the who's who of companies. A lot of the major tech companies, some of the biggest brands. It is a mega week for earnings reports. 1/3 of the S&P 500 companies, as you said, Allison, and the Dow. So we just heard from Tesla. They beat earnings and revenue expectations. The company reported $1.14 billion in net income for the quarter. That's the first time the electric vehicle maker surpassed $1 billion. So quite a benchmark for them. We also hear from, Apple, Alphabet, Microsoft, Facebook, Amazon. Tuesday and Thursday are the biggest days to watch, the busiest days around here. Also reporting this week, we have McDonald's, Boeing, Visa, and Chevron. Now, Allison, some of the most common topics so far this earnings season from companies that have already reported has been inflation, price increases, labor shortages, and outlook for demand. So we'll likely get much more color on those areas as the week progresses.
Rahel, I should have asked you who isn't reporting. It would have been an easier list to go through.
Faster, right?
So you mentioned this one. Yeah, it would have been quick, right? Yeah. You mentioned this. The Federal Reserve meets tomorrow and Wednesday. We're not expecting them to change interest rates, but what are you watching for out of this two-day meeting?
Exactly. We don't expect a change in interest rates, but we do think that talks about when to start tapering asset purchases. That might start to heat up this week. The central bank appears pretty divided about whether to keep injecting money into the market and keep rates near zero, or whether to start scaling back spending and raise interest rates sooner to try to slow inflation, which, as we know, has gotten quite hot.
Yeah, that is certainly the hot topic for sure. Everyone wants to know what's going on with inflation, if it's temporary, if it's going to be long lasting, and how do we get it under control. All right, so it's not all just the Fed. We also have some really important economic data out later in this week that has to do with inflation as well. What's on deck?
Yeah, I think the other big one is real GDP. That's on Thursday. GDP, of course, being the sum of all goods and services produced in the economy. The expectation here is 8.5%, which would be another good read for an economy that's about 2/3 driven by consumer spending. We should say that some economists do expect this to be the last quarter of big GDP growth before it starts to slow in the second half of the year, especially as we continue watching inflation and price increases. Plus, of course, there is the Delta variant and its potential lockdowns, which could hamper growth. So Thursday is a big day, not just for earnings, but also real GDP.
Rahel, I know you got a crazy week ahead. Thank you for making the time for us. We always appreciate it.
Always good to be with you, Allison.
A Latino Get Out the Vote group is going door to door this summer, but they're not looking for voters. For years, Mi Familia Vota, a national organization, has sent people out to Latino neighborhoods to register voters and persuade them to vote. Now the group's using its election canvassing methods to get more Latinos vaccinated. NBCNews.com reporter Suzanne Gamboa is covering MFV's efforts for us. Suzanne, they just started going door to door in Texas. They're also knocking on doors in Nevada and California. Tell us more about this group's work.
This is a group that has one of the largest or the largest field teams out during elections. And they've been doing this for about 2 decades. So now they've decided that they need to get out and with all of the very bad rates of vaccinations among Latinos, that they really need to get out and go door to door. They're banking on this sort of trusted partnership that they have with the community, where their face is known, their name is known. They go to the community often for votes. So now they're trying to see if they can just translate that into people trusting what they're saying about vaccinations to get them, get their shots.
So let's get into the root of the problem here. Why is canvassing for COVID shots so important in the Latino community?
Well, I think what we've been seeing in studies is that there is a willingness to get vaccinated, that Latinos are sometimes like 2 and 3 times more willing, but that the vaccinations have really lagged behind. And what we're finding is that it's not. There's hesitancy, there's disinformation, just like other groups. But what we also are seeing just lately is that some of the biggest increases in vaccinations or in vaccines are going to Hispanics. So like in a state like Texas, just since March, there's been like this big increase in vaccinations actually going to Hispanics. And they're facing all kinds of reasons, like many other people. It can be not having a car, disinformation about whether or not to get vaccinated, not knowing where to go, not having the information. That's what a couple people out there, when I went out walking with these groups, told us. One woman said, I was about to go to CVS to find out where to go. I didn't know where to go.
So how is MFV hoping to grow this outreach? Because in many ways they are small but mighty, right? If I read correctly, there's just one woman going around in Texas right now?
Right, yeah, and she actually was hired maybe like a week before I went out. The week I was going to go out with her, she hadn't even been hired yet, so they pushed it back. But yeah, they usually work on volunteers, and they not just volunteers, but they also have some paid staff. So this is very hard to do this for elections and also, in the middle between elections right now. And they also need funding so that they can put people on staff. And that's not just readily available. The fundraising they usually do is for elections. So they're trying to find that resource. But they do have people in 6 states. When they do go out, they're in 6 different states or sometimes more. And they do have that established relationship with the community that, mass vaccination sites have only worked so much. So now there's, as even President Biden is saying, we have to go door to door. And so that's what they're trying to do.
And look, you've said it. It's not just an issue of vaccine hesitancy, right? This is a community where many people want to get the vaccines. Wonderful to hear that they're meeting them where they are and trying to get them to them. Suzanne, thank you for your reporting.
Great. Thank you.
Starting next week, if you want to eat out or travel in France, you need a COVID vaccine pass, thanks to a controversial bill that drew tens of thousands of protesters to the streets of Paris. Here's NBC News foreign correspondent Claudia Lavanga.
Hey, Alison. Well, this morning the French Parliament has approved the controversial law that means that starting from August the 1st, the first week of August, the French who want to access indoor places like restaurants, cafes, or swimming pools and gyms and so forth, they will have to prove that they're either fully vaccinated, they have a negative test within the 48 hours, or that they recovered from COVID at least for 6 months. Well, this is, of course, a law that has stirred a lot of emotions. First, it led to a massive boost in vaccination requests. 3.7 million new vaccination requests came in the week after the President Macron announced that law, the implementation of that law about a couple of weeks ago. But that excitement, I think, it worn off fairly quickly because there have been demonstrations every weekend since then. And on Saturday, 160,000 French people, they descended the streets all across France to demonstrate against it. Well, now the same thing seems to have happened here in Italy. The Italian government last week announced that starting from August the 6th, similar measures will be implemented, even though all you need here is not to be fully vaccinated. You need at least a dose to get inside indoor places like restaurants and so forth. But still, it has attracted a lot of demonstrations. On Saturday, tens of thousands of people descended here in the streets of 81 cities across Italy to demonstrate against the Green Pass. But it must be said that the vast majority of Italians, as in the rest of Europe, are in favor of getting vaccinated. They are in favor as a consequence of a Green Pass. Here in Italy, for instance, almost half of the country is fully immunized, fully vaccinated, and according to our latest survey, only 13% of Italians are so-called no-vax. They will refuse a vaccination no matter what. So in the cases of France and Italy, it shows how these kind of measures can lead to both a boost in the vaccination. As in Italy, the vaccination requests have gone up about 200% in certain age groups. But at the same time, they can really stir emotions and lead people to demonstrate, in some cases, like in Italy, fairly aggressively.
There's been an onslaught of videos showing police violence against African Americans, and it's taking a toll on black communities. One woman in New York now offering an independent crisis hotline to help. That hotline's so popular, NBC News Now correspondent Isa Gutierrez reports they're getting calls from all over the continent. We want to warn you, you may find parts of this upcoming story disturbing.
As instances of police violence continue to spread across social media.
What started out as a mental health call turned into a man being shot dead.
And the black community deals with the trauma of what seems like an endless stream of videos. Some people are stepping up with new support services. After the death of Mike Brown in 2014, community organizer Vanessa Green started Call Blackline, a hotline to answer black people's cries for help.
Black people need a hotline. We started Call Blackline really in Newburgh. The number was an 800 number, but we were just centering Newburgh.
Then the hotline in Newburgh, New York turned into a national line. Now they even receive calls from Canada.
Calls range from lonely black people in their home, right? To I have folks who call who are schizophrenic, so it's a range of calls, a range of problems. And then the uprising hit. Oh, and goddess. Then the calls probably went up from a couple of hundred a month to over 1,000.
Due to the lack of funding, the 24/7 hotline only has 15 volunteers, 2 per average 6-hour shift. Tanya Connor Mitchell is one of those volunteers.
I want to show you the picture of me and Vanessa. This was at the march. It was a march for black women. People's mental health is real. People struggle, anxiety, depression. And when you call the hotline, the suicide hotline, that's all they want you to talk about. Not the fact that you had a messed up day today, or you were called a today, or so they couldn't call there. We needed our own. Hello, Blackline.
They trying to cover it up.
I'm so sorry that happened to your nephew, but it's up to you and the community and those who cared and loved him and just us to bring that to light, because that's not how it's supposed to be.
And that's what they think. that nobody cared.
Right. Most times, again, people just want you to listen. So you're going to pay a therapist. You don't have the money to pay a therapist just to listen. So you call us and we'll listen. And then it keeps our people safe to be able to call us and to talk to us as opposed to what is the other option, which is 911.
Common types of 911 calls that advocates say can be handled better by non-police alternatives include those regarding mental health, domestic disputes, and housing-related issues like noise complaints. Some organizations have even created guides with different resources to call instead of 911 in those situations.
I do think that there's an over-reliance on police and on calling 911, and I think that many law enforcement officers would agree that they get called for all sorts of situations that are not urgent public safety challenges. We've known for a long time that there's well-founded and deep-seated mistrust of police officers, particularly in communities of color.
A few hours from Tanya's home, Albany County Sheriff Craig Apple says his team is testing out a new program to answer non-criminal 911 calls.
And we have mental health teams that now go out on the street for those calls that aren't, quote, the emergencies that need the police and the deputies there right off the bat. And those calls include emotionally disturbed persons, threats of suicide. So instead of just dialing 911 and we would send an EMT and a police officer, now we could send this team in. It's a social worker and an EMT and or paramedic.
How do you spell racist? NYPD. Many are now demanding departments be defunded.
It's not the time to also be talking about defunding our police. We have an uptick in violence in our community here in Albany County, New York. We still need our police officers.
As for organizations that don't feel law enforcement are the best equipped to respond to certain calls,
I think when you start to cut out police, it's problematic. They need to be there. They need to be present. They need to be part of the conversation. And many times I see folks, advocates that are like, you know, we can do this. We don't need police. We can handle this ourselves. You need to have police involved. And that way we can also show the community that, listen, we want to work with you. We want to help you. We want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. I'm very leery of having law enforcement cut out of the equation. I just think that could lead for a recipe for disaster.
So what would you say to people who say, how are you guys going to be able to handle calls that require emergency services or something like that?
Like if somebody is shot or if somebody broke their leg, they know, go to the hospital, call 911.
You're saying pretty much for anything that's not a medical emergency?
Medical emergencies is 911. We never say call us if, you need stitches. But if you need someone to talk to or someone to help you, we can give them resources and people to call.
But of course, there are circumstances between emotional support calls and medical emergencies. Robberies, domestic violence. Tanya says that even in situations involving crime, many are hesitant to call the police, fearing what may happen when they show up to the scene.
When your job is based on looking at me as if I'm a criminal at all times, no matter where I am, who I'm with, that's a problem for me.
For example, in Albany, they have this program that they're piloting, hiring mental health specialists and social workers.
Good start. They need to do much, much more before I can trust them. And I definitely speak for my community because we don't trust them. We just don't. And we have all reasons not to. It's easy for you to tell me that I need to get over it and you've never been, it's not you. It's not your people. It's not your race.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.